Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee with the Curator. I'm Lidna Hocking, the archivist at the Litchfield Historical Society. As the person responsible for choosing what documents we acquire, how we describe them, and helping researchers locate the information they need within them, I spend a lot of time reading other people's shaky scrawl, and honestly, I love it. Today, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for reading these documents. I think that maybe I will hopefully inspire one or more of you to become a volunteer to transcribe some of our collections. There are several benefits to having things transcribed. One of them is that researchers like homeowners, genealogists, and students who may have very little exposure to reading documents from early periods sometimes have difficulty understanding what they're looking for, or looking at, rather. Transcriptions help them easily determine whether the letter, deed, or account book they're viewing may have something to do with their topic of research. Another benefit is that transcribed documents are keyword searchable. If they're online, they're crawled by search engines. Whereas we may only be able to give a line or two of description in our catalog, if the entire document is available to be searched, our patrons can find better results. Another great benefit of having our documents transcribed is that we can use them in education programs. This is a great example. It's a letter written in cipher by Colonel Benjamin Talmadge to General George Washington. We were able to use the code dictionary that's at the Library of Congress, which they've made available online, to decode the letter, and it's now the central component of one of our most popular education programs. It's a bit challenging for me to try to explain how to do this because it's sort of second nature to me at this point. I just read the documents. I learned reading and writing cursive in school, so it doesn't look like hieroglyphics to me. If it does to you, try finding a copy of this book. It's called Reading Early American Handwriting by Kip Sperry. It contains helpful abbreviations like INST means instant or DO means ditto. When our ancestors were writing with quill pens, they understandably took shortcuts. Also keep in mind that before Noah Webster and his dictionary, there was very little in the way of standardized spelling. You will see a lot of words that were written phonetically. There are even instances of people spelling their own name in more than one way. The word may actually be what you think it is, even if it isn't spelled the way that it is today. There are a few helpful websites that we try to help out with words that we're stuck on. One of them is OneLook. It's a dictionary search that lets you use wildcards. What that means is that if you can figure out the first letter and maybe the last three letters of a word, you put an asterisk in the middle of those letters and your results will include every possible combination. The asterisk can go wherever you need it to, beginning, end, or middle, and you can look through the results and see if any of them are possibly the word that was written in the sentence that you're transcribing based on the rest of the context of that sentence. Oops, sorry, wrong way. So Webster's 1828 dictionary is also a really valuable resource. It contains definitions for words that have fallen out of use. So if you're transcribing a letter to a doctor and you see that someone is looking for a cure for their scrofula, as I did, you can look it up and find out what the heck that is. There are also useful tools that can help you when you're trying to learn something about the people involved in a document, whether it be the person writing, who they're writing to, or maybe somebody that's mentioned in the letter. These are three of the sites that we often go to. We usually start with our own databases because we have a lot of information about individuals in there, and many of them are local. And since our collections are from Litchfield, that really helps. We also use more national cooperative sites that contain information from various catalogs around the country, including one called SNAC, as well as the Library of Congress Authority Files. We also sometimes turn to other sites like Political Graveyard, Find a Grave, or Wikipedia that all contain information contributed by individuals. So when you use those sites, you may or may not find citations for where that information came from. So now that you know what tools are available, we're going to look at a few documents. I'll show you a few things from different time periods and demonstrate how handwriting trends changed over time. You can get used to any of them. Keep in mind that the more time one spends with a particular person's correspondence or journal, the easier it will become. I'm sharing with you 4 different 19th century documents. They're from different parts of the century. I'll read you some excerpts and ask you to try to figure some things out. If you do, you can add what you think a letter says or the line of the letter I refer to in the comment section. And I'm going to try to follow along and answer whether you have questions or guesses as to what we're reading. So we're going to start here with a letter from Ephraim Kirby. I may be mispronouncing his names. That we can find a lot of information about what these words are and how to spell them, but the pronunciation of names is a little tricky. And it's written to a Mr. Twining. From Litchfield, February 10th, 1800. Mr. Twining, will you give me a direct and unequivocal answer to the following interrogatory, viz., have you ever directly or indirectly said or suggested that I was or that you believe me to be an infidel? I do not desire to trouble you any farther than to answer this inquiry by a single monosyllable. Your obedient servant, Ephraim Kirby. There are a number of things that you can tell from this correspondence that's really common to a lot of writing in that time period. First is the date line. We still do this today. At the very top of the letter, there's usually a line that has the place the letter is coming from, as well as the date. Occasionally, you'll find that at the bottom of a letter, but more often than not, it'll be up there in the top right-hand corner. As today, you'll also find a salutation. It's usually more formal than what we'd find today, and that'll be followed many times by a line referring to a previous correspondence, but this letter does not have that. You may know, however, that what it does have, there are a lot of underscores as opposed to having a period at the end of the sentence. They would often use what looks to us like an underscore. And you will also notice how frequently they abbreviate letters. So we have February abbreviated, Mr., obedient, and servant. And when they abbreviate letters, more often than not, the last letter of the word is put in sort of superscript writing above the line. You see that with the names too, like Ephraim Kirby. So with the next letter, we'll try and see if any of you can read any of this. So can anyone tell me what the place or the date of the letter is? I'll give you a minute to add a comment. I should theoretically be able to see them. And actually, Kate, our educator, was going to share the images of these in the comment line as well, so that you would be able to see them more clearly and enlarge them on your computer. The limitations of the PowerPoint through Facebook are that you can not really see the top or the bottom of the screen. So let's see. I don't see any comments coming in, so I'll just go ahead and tell you what it is. The top line of this letter reads New Haven, February 19th, 1800, and as before, February is abbreviated, and you can see the Y up above the line there. Sir, I received your letter on the 10th instant, a few minutes since. To your question, whether I have ever directly or indirectly said or suggested that you were or that I believed you to be an infidel, I answer that I think it probable I have suggested and perhaps directly said that I believed you to be an infidel. Curry Walker, New Haven, correct. Sorry, I just saw your comment now. I'm wondering if there's a bit of a delay in the comments coming through. And I'll give you guys a minute and see if anybody can maybe tell me what comes next. So the last sentence of the document, can anyone tell what that says? Or even the closing line. And I'll give you a hint, it's pretty similar to the previous letter. Okay, now I'm starting to wonder whether you're hearing me in the same time I'm saying it. So, all right, I'll just keep going. So he then goes on to say, for that was my opinion. This, sir, is as direct an answer as my recollection enables me to make. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Stephen Twining. So that's a letter that we think maybe might have inspired a duel, but doesn't seem to have in this instance, because this is the last bit of correspondence we have about the matter, and we don't really know how or if they resolved it in any way. But the next letter is from a few years later, and this one was written by our local newspaper publisher. And you can see the style's a little bit different. He maybe was not as well educated as Messrs. Kirby and Twining, but this is written by Thomas Collier, and you'll see similarities with the other two letters in the placement of the date line and the location, as well as the closing and the salutation. So this is written from, as I said, Thomas Collier. It's written to Frederick Wolcott, who was a local businessman who went to the law school. He became a lawyer and eventually a judge, a clerk in the court, the county court in Litchfield. And so he was a pretty prominent individual in town. So Thomas Collier wrote to him and said, as it unfortunately happens that the poverty of my purse, having neither gold nor silver at command, and what is more humbling, the poverty of my credit, put it out of my power to supply myself with a sufficient quantity of paper for this week's newspaper, I am compelled, in the absence of Mr. Smith and Holmes, to request you furnish me with an order on J. Deming, Esquire, to the amount of $20 in paper. You will be safe in doing this, having received not to exceed $40 of the sum promised me on our last agreement. Without this aid, I cannot publish this weekend. I have dispatched the boy soon as possible, as the paper is immediately wanted. In haste, yours, etc., Thomas Collier. So there are a few things that I wanted to note about this letter that I think are also really helpful in terms of transcription. Collier, I guess, being a publisher, enjoyed writing, and so he has some alliteration going on here. And so you can see in the first line we have poverty, the second line we have purse, the third line we have poverty again. Then he talks about paper. So you can see that the letter P is recurring throughout the letter. And that just brings home the point that, oh, and I forgot to go forward so you could see the second half of the letter. So there's the bottom half. When you get into the middle of something and you find that you can't make out a word, one tip is always to look for a letter that looks like that same letter in another word and see if you know what the other word is. Maybe that can help you discern what that letter is, and then you can, by comparison, conclude what the word is in the other location, the thing that you were having trouble finding out. So that's not just true of P's. It was just a good example because there are so many of them in this letter. And then I want to jump a little bit forward in the century and show you a letter written by a Civil War soldier. His name was Elvis Stone. And he wrote this letter December 28th, 1861. And it was written to his wife and his daughter. And the top of the letter doesn't look like there's much to transcribe, but actually it is kind of interesting. It's a diagram of his tent. And if you look at it closely, you can see that he drew the beds, he drew the pole, he said who slept in which place, where the wash tub was, where the wood box was. And I recognize that this is a little bit small, probably on some of your screens. But one of the other challenges of Civil War correspondence, especially, is that a lot of it was written in pencil and has faded over the years. So a really good way to deal with this challenge is to either scan the letter and increase the contrast using a tool like Photoshop or just auto image software on your computer. You can also use if you're in a reading room and you're trying to read something like this, you can use a magnifying glass, or you could use a camera on your phone or device to try to enlarge it, because that really helps with reading it. And the second half of this letter, oops, keep going the wrong way. The second half of this letter is more is actual correspondence. So he's writing to his wife and daughter here, and he says, Saturday, you will see by the above sketch how we are stationed inside our canvas house. Overhead on the pole, we hang our washing and any loose things like towels and such. Lieutenant Vale has his rations with us, but sleeps at the captain's quarters. We have just room enough for 10 men, could in a pinch accommodate a few more, but 10 is plenty. And then he goes on to talk about the Rhode Island battery. And you can see, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it seems to me like the later it is in the century, the more the handwriting starts looking like what we maybe learned in school, what comes across as more modern handwriting to us. And then the last letter I wanted to share, it's actually 2 pages, and you can see it here. And I think this may be the most readable of the ones I'm sharing today. And so if anyone wants to take a crack at it and see if you can tell me where this letter was written from, and to whom, well, you may not know to whom it was written, but I think it'll be pretty clear who wrote it there on the second page. So take a look and see if you can take any guesses as to who did that. She was one of Litchfield's more famous residents, although she left town when she was about 11 years old, so that's your hint. She went from Litchfield to Ohio, but she eventually made her way back to Connecticut. No guesses? Okay. All right, well, let's start at the beginning, and maybe by the time I get to the end, someone will have a suggestion as to who they think wrote it. Oh, it's there. Hi, Humphrey. Harriet Beecher Stowe. You're absolutely right. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote this letter to Mrs. Seymour. There were a lot of Mrs. Seymours, but you'll see in pencil at the top of the letter, someone has noted to Mary Harrison Seymour. And I wonder if anyone else wants to try to chime in on maybe one of the lines in the letter and tell me why she's writing a thank you note to Mrs. Seymour. Can anyone read it? Oh, thanks, Kate. It looks like Kate has also shared images of all the letters that we're talking about here, and she gives a link for where you can find them. So I think that should help you if you want to give it a shot at reading them in more detail later. And if you have any questions about reading them, you can post them here in the comments, and we'll come back to it later and see if there are any other questions that we can answer later, even if we're offline. So Harriet Beecher Stowe was writing a thank you note to Mrs. Seymour because she had remembered her birthday. She thanks her for her lovely note, full of pleasant thoughts, and an enclosed bunch of heart's ease from the dear old garden in Litchfield. Uh-oh. Okay, so Curry Walker, we will work that out and figure out how to get the images up here for you. It seems like the images aren't, the link isn't working right. So let's see. So she goes on to say their delicate fragrance brought a, see, and now sometimes I even have trouble with these words. I think, well, I'm not gonna guess. Brought a, let's see, something, oh, rush, that's what it is. It's rush of happy recollections of years long past. My 82nd birthday was made very bright and happy by the kindness of my, let me get on to the second page. Sorry, I'm opening these in another window, so I'll actually be able to read them because the window's even smaller on my computer right now because I'm trying to see your comments too. She goes on, friends and neighbors who called to see me, bringing with them lovely roses and still more lovely words of kindness and friendship. With love yourself and kindness remembrance to Mr. Seymour and your good boy Ned, whom I always remember with great pleasure. Ever affectionately, your friend, Harriet Beecher Stowe. So if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and put them off to into the comment section, and we'll get to them later. And if anyone's been inspired by this and wants to help us transcribe things, we're sort of limited right now by what things have already been digitized that we could send you. Every one of the notebooks from the Litchfield Law School has been digitized, so that would be a great place to start if you're interested in doing that. We also have a lot of material that we can actually access that's on our server, but not necessarily on our website. So if you are interested in doing some transcription work, just go ahead and email me, and I'll put my email address in the comments too. And we'll send you a few documents and see if you actually like doing it. The next or last thing I wanted to share with you is a list of our upcoming events. So tomorrow, Kate is hosting another online cursive class. If you aren't already registered and want to get involved with that, you can just go to our website and register. And Friday, April 10th, Kate will also be hosting another What Is That? A Museum History Mystery. And we hope you'll join us again next week for another Coffee with the Curator. And Alex will be back next week and talk to you about some other artifacts in our collection. Thanks very much. Hope you all have a great day.